There's no contradiction between a radically egalitarian democratic politics that materially assures everybody that still is going to want to pursue human distinction and greatness and artistic, athletic, and all other endeavors. He celebrates that. He talks about a rich and dynamic culture along with understanding profoundly our interdependence, both to each other and in our broader ecology. His ability to recognize people as complex individuals beyond how capitalist realism and projects that flow out of capitalist realism see them, only as competitive subjects in a market, or the essentialist left, simply as amalgamations of identities with ascriptive identities and behaviors that are acceptable or unacceptable. He sees people as broad living organisms. And that's why when he even calls Donald Trump a gangster, even someone as Donald Trump, which is, you could not find an easier person to simply write off for being a thoroughly grotesque, evil person than Donald Trump. He's up there in the top tier. Cornell West is still turning back on himself in terms of, I have my own gangster traits. The irony of this ability to self-access and not exclude anybody in a fundamentalist, fanatical way actually incentivizes the types of self-inquiry and capacity to actually truly transform institutions, individuals, economics, and behaviors and culture. When Gramsci talked about hegemony, he was talking about a bold strategy to win over people to Marxism from across cultural and regional groups, not to force a specific culture on society. We need to be winning over football fans, hype beasts, and everyone else. That doesn't mean you for a second compromise on your values. I've never seen somebody more committed, frankly, to a broader set of values. Marxist, Christian, humanist, civic, and revolutionary than Cornell West. That synthesis, that broadness, that's why I admire the man so much. There's too much focus on making socialism a social distinction. It's not. It's a movement for liberation that means including many different people. And of course, that brings us back to Mark Fisher's genius 2014 essay that we haven't fully absorbed yet, The Vampire Castle. A socialism that's exclusive cannot win, and is exactly the kind of toxic strategy that we need to avoid on all costs and only plays into the hands of capital. As Mark Fisher argued, why would capital be concerned about a left that replaces class politics with moralizing individualism, that's far from building solidarity and spreads fear and insecurity? This is also why, though, that when we talk about things like love and vision and empathy, it includes all of that, it includes the changes, it includes the transformations in a broad, inviting, and strategic way. Gramsci said, the popular element feels but does not always know or understand. The intellectual element knows but does not always understand, and in a particular does not always feel. We need to free ourselves from the habit, this is also Gramsci from the selected writing, we need to free ourselves from the habit of seeing culture as an encyclopedia of knowledge and men as mere receptacles to be stuffed of empirical data and a mass of unconnected raw facts which have to be filled in the brain as columns of a dictionary, enabling their owner to respond to the various stimuli of the outside world. And finally, the challenge of modernity is to live without illusions, without becoming disillusioned. I'm a pessimism because of intelligence, but an optimist because of the will. As Cornell West shows, the left can talk about ourselves as individuals, even as we speak about our broader spiritual, revolutionary, and social desires. We don't have to choose between achieving personal greatness at the expense of our neighbor or comrades. And we don't have to choose to shrink back from challenging and transforming ourselves from new systems of isolation, control, and hectoring. We can win with a politics of love, community, and inclusivity. We just need to build it. That's why West did so well on Rogan. And I really mean it. Look, I don't think nobody is perfect. And another part of evolving a healthy culture is not putting anybody up on a pedestal. But that being said, there is no one else with the sort of age and stature right now holding all of this besides Cornell West. I mean, I cannot emphasize, he is absolutely the most important public intellectual we have. And we have an abundance. I mean, we have many amazing contributors. Angela Davis is still with us. We get to hang out with Richard Wolff. Obviously, Chomsky, of course. And people across the globe. It's actually great sadness to me that Asma Jahangir passed. Incredible Pakistani rights activist. But Cornell West holds these different threads in a way that's absolutely unique, and we need to model and learn from. I think that this is a clear example of any, and that this is a choice of literally your basics of what you support. Period. This is not obscure debate. This isn't social media controversy. This isn't even a time for tactical calculation. The president of the United States is using eliminationist rhetoric against women of color who are massively significant political leaders. And they have been consistently portrayed and undermined by their own party leadership. And that's why you can disagree with these particular people. I don't think there's any room for disagreement on the concentration camps. But this is absolutely outside of the realm of political debate and distinction. This is fundamentally, where are you at, who are you with, and how do you move? And the fact that by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have undermined them every step of the way has emboldened. I'm not saying that Trump wouldn't do this anyways, but you make the attack significantly more open. Now, conversely, you've created a situation where who's more important to the country right now? Ilhan Omar is more important than Nancy Pelosi right now. Ayanna Pressley is more important than Richard Neal right now. AOC is certainly more important than fucking Steny Hoyer. And Rashida Tlaib is more important than Chuck Schumer. Now, not institutionally. Institutionally, this is still the sclerotic, dysfunctional, corporate compromised hackery of the Democratic leadership. But the energy of the country is here. And if someone like Maureen Dowd thinks that this is scaling woke back mountain because you're clear that the same president who helped run the media lynch mob against the Central Park Five, and I use that word quite consciously, called for killing them, called for bringing back the death penalty for them, and has still not apologized to this day, even as they were innocent, that there is no room. So she calls it scaling woke back mountain, I believe is the last. And it's just funny to me as somebody who understands the Vampire Castle essay as an example, which people always should read by Mark Fisher. This has nothing to do with that. This is fundamentally, as Bill Fletcher Jr. would say, about whether democracy is real or not, about whether you take humanity seriously, about whether you take any type of serious anti-racist project seriously. So people like Maureen Dowd are making themselves quite clear. They don't take any of these things seriously, and they prefer to kibitz and gossip about these four who are showing more leadership and are at more personal risk than anybody else in this whole situation. Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Hakeem Jeffries, all of that. It's disgusting. It's pathetic, and they need to be primaried. We're going to focus on the candidate running against Eliot Engel. We're going to focus more. There's a great candidate running against Steny Hoyer. I'd like to see somebody taking a look at Hakeem Jeffries. Apparently, Hakeem Jeffries is in charge of the House Democrats' Twitter account. And if you don't think that the cynical weaponization of neoliberal, quote unquote, identity politics would only be used against Bernie Sanders, don't be naive. This is a cynical political tactic of people who have no commitment to anything and nothing to sell. They will use it even as these women's lives are literally at risk. So, as always, we stand with Ilhan. But it's also an opportunity to both acknowledge some space where the left and the center can co-inhabit together in terms of very basic things. Understanding that racism is a poison, understanding that we need societies built on mutuality, rights, respects, all of the things that Obama has always been so brilliant at articulating. But here's the deal for liberals. The only way you can get the society that you want is by, first of all, a forthright and serious fight against the forces of bigotry, which will not be achieved by civility. It's going to be achieved by confrontation. And secondly, by a radical commitment to democratizing the economy and socializing and decommodifying mass parts of economic activity to align democracy in the economic sphere with the civil and social sphere. As long as those spheres are misaligned, and as long as such an unbelievable amount of inequality, abuse, oppression, and exploitation exists, there is always going to be a ripe spot in the immune system for the barbarism of our moment. As Bill Fletcher Jr. says, right-wing populism is the herpes of capitalism. And we're living in that disgusting image right now. And if you can't confront those fundamental conditions, you're not going to solve the problem. So the challenge is, okay, let's acknowledge where we share some common values with the center. But the center is going to need to be real about how we preserve those common values. That is the fundamental task.
Reid, Adolf Reid. Yes, there we go. Yes, right there. His critique of like every single modern tendency in the left, from like sub-Marxist pockets to identitarian, like he's just nailing it. He's nailing it. He's just hitting like again and again and again. He sees things crystal clear. And what you realize when you're reading it, and this goes to what you're saying, Griscom, is it's like if you don't, and you know, Reid is a super clear writer, and you know, folks can read and understand, and you know, it's another thing to be balanced about is you don't, you know, this academicization of what should be like really broad and common discourses is also a problem. But like, if you haven't read that introduction, you're almost certainly going to replicate a lot of mistakes that are a product of a historical moment before a lot of us were born, that just help contextualize. And so, you know, there is that, you know, push and pull, and actually thinking and getting grounded in where we're at is really important. And also what Joshua was also pointing to, among other things, is some people are allergic to the word spiritual. I don't care, you know, whatever word you want. There's going to be some like inner capacity building that is going to also need to be part of the mix too.
Reading material suggestion on understanding power. I'm reading this great book just called Strategy. It's a history of all different forms of strategy, from the primate world to the Greeks to the art of war. I think it's fascinating. I would read different guerrilla leaders you might be interested in. There's actually relevant tactics there, but I also read business management books. I try to dip into Gramsci's ideas on hegemony. Those are going to be relevant. I'd read memoirs of hack political consultants, but people who've actually, run and ran campaigns. We need to focus on that type of thing, like actual winning content.
Then, guys, we also have fantasy. And I want to be a little bit more gentle than I can be sometimes. I think the impulse for revolutionary change is correct. We actually need revolutionary change in this country and globally. As Anna said, this is literally a matter of planetary survival. But at the same time, this push towards the rhetoric of revolution, or the escapist fantasy of revolution, that we could, and it comes in two ways. One is some people go to examples like 1917 Russia or 1950s in Cuba, and they think of completely different historical times, completely different historical conditions, and project that it would be fun to do something like that here. Now, by the way, I want to make clear, I am not at all opposed to, I want people to be reading about Cuba, Russia, Thomas Sankara, anywhere, Just as maybe I want you to actually be reading books about business strategy. Okay. Like, I think taking from historical examples and finding inspiration is incredibly generative and incredibly positive. But historically, these are complete non-alignments. Just let's take two really quick examples to illustrate that. As my friend Daniel Bessner pointed out, Stalin, let's be really provocative, during the Russian Revolution was in a position where, as some people know, that they were the revolutionaries carried out petty crimes, or I guess significant crimes like bank robberies and stuff like this in Tsarist Russia. They could go and get jail bids and either escape from jail or get let out of jail, as an example. If somebody in a revolutionary undertaking in 2020 went and tried to rob a bank, they would be killed or spend the rest of their life in maximum security prison with no broader cultural or political dissent from the general population.
The other very specific thing that David Harvey points out, and David Harvey really is my kind of guide to neoliberalism as a concept, not just like a buzzword we throw around, is that this is a political backlash, which we can trace to things like the Powell memo.
And I would say in the case of your progressive friend, I think honestly, I'll do a shameless plug. You should be telling them to listen to this show as an example, because I do think with people like that who are already there politically, they just need social permission to not play into those cliches. I think
you need community.
Yeah, you need community. Precisely. And I think and it's funny too, like this is a difference between being in your mid 30s and mid 20s, right? Like, I mean, like there's plenty of people who are my age who've always had left politics, even publicly so, but have had like the progression of like, oh man, like, do I have to fucking pretend that, you know, that's a problem or what, you know what I'm saying? Like, because there's all these,
yeah,
and that's why we need to be very worried in general, I think, about sort of substituting mores for politics. But I would recommend your friend listen to this show and you know, all the other shows in this universe. I think that would be helpful. Your centrist friend, I don't know, man. I think it's one thing to talk about somebody who's kind of on the center left and bringing them through policy, but I got to say, like, a diet of Dothat, Brooks, and Boot, I mean, does not a sharp
George
mind
Will,
make.
Will.
But you know, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I guess in his case, what I would say is if you want, maybe you could give him like books by like Jacob Hacker as an example, who actually, it's less polemical, but it's like the actual numbers on asymmetric polarization and the actual political science of why the cliches that are peddled by those people. And then, you know, your Republican friend, I don't know. I mean, you know, talk about basketball or football or whatever. Thanks for the call, man.
You know, I've actually, and I will totally admit, I've not read and do not read enough novels. I have, you know, I'm not totally, you know, I am a fiction reader at times, but some of the only like real literary heavy lifting I have done is reading Dostoevsky. And it's, I mean, well-earned arrogance in that area. Like, that stuff's for real. And also, you know, it's actually really good. Some of it's really good to read too, because you can actually, I would say from a much broader perspective, if you include the artistic, but even like the idea of like steel manning the other side, reading Dostoevsky is amazing on any number of levels, but it gives you like, that's going to be the best case for Russian Orthodox reactionary politics you're ever going to encounter. It's kind of shockingly compelling.
Sidebar. You know, I think you'll find that the great communicators are the people who are constantly whining about being taken out of context.
That's how it works.
That's definitely a sign that you're good.
Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom.
Yeah.
Like the whole time he's out of jail, he's like, I was taken out of context again. Another total distortion.
Typical Afrikaner media.
Fake news. Guys, you got to read this book. Give them an argument. Logic for the Left. As soon as it's available on pre-order, I'll be tweeting it out. In doing this book, like, you look at like people like Scott Atran, who's an anthropologist who does ethnographic research on why people join like ISIS as an example, and he's also looking at why people would join the alt-right now. And of course, there's a lot of very similar reasons. There is actually some overlapping like middle-class alienation, and it does have problems also that specifically have to do with, like, you know, young men.
and some things that are real and deserve actual policy action and compassion, right? But what's funny is like what all of these people are saying, from like Scott Atran to even like a Robert Putnam bowling alone, is like so many of these problems, even outside of the real policy stuff, are because people are not in communities and are totally alienated from each other. And part of what these groups do is they have like these surrogate value providers and community cohesion, right? And then Jordan Peterson's saying like, clean your room out of your alienation. Like, one should clean their room and one should take care of their body and all that. And that's great if you take that from him. But the fundamental presupposition that you're going to deal with these like really serious alienation problems by doubling down on individual isolation, no.
That'll keep the testosterone flowing.
When I was probably in the age bracket of people who really get into this stuff, somewhere between like 18 and 22, I was a huge fan of this guy, Ken Wilber, who I actually still like. I think he's really interesting and worth reading. He wrote really interesting books on religion, on science, psychology. He was super trendy in like the early aughts and late 90s, and people like Bill Clinton loved him. And I remember when he started writing, I was in college, and he started writing more about things like politics, which I knew more about. And I was like, oh, that's wrong. Like you're messing up basic stuff here. And then I thought to myself, wait, so if that's that sloppy, should I really be taking this guy's word when he writes about like Newtonian physics, something which I know like less than nothing about, or, translations of Chinese Buddhist texts? Maybe not. Now, I still happen to think in his case that his theoretical models are actually super helpful and interesting, and I wish people were reading him instead of Jordan Peterson. But I use that as a door to this Sam Harris clip, because I would invite you to entertain the possibility that if Sam Harris's analysis of politics in the ideal 2020 candidate, is so both empirically disconnected from reality and such a obvious projection, in fact, of like pure identity politics would actually be the only way to describe this, and so profoundly disconnected from, I'm not talking moral, I'm talking just a strategic assessment of where the Democratic Party is and also what would be required to win back the types of voters that he alludes to in this segment. Entertain the possibility that if he knows this little about politics, maybe he's overselling himself a little bit on other areas that he speaks with such sort of projected grand authority on. I'll give one serious debunk. If he wants to specifically criticize the U.S. foreign policy in partnership with Gulf states of, at times, funding Salafist groups, I think that is a valid criticism, and it's a part of a broader criticism of U.S. empire and U.S. interference and U.S. Essentially chessboard games with other powers in the region.
They're also supporting the monarchies and stuff there too.
They're also That's right. Exactly. They're also supporting the monarchies. They're also supporting the secular dictatorships. They're also supporting even the Kurds that we support, because it's called politics. So, being that as it may, I'm sure that obviously he and Dummy Dave are not serious about that. But if you're watching it and you're shocked by that, go read an actual book like Steve Coll's Ghost Wars or Directorate S. Start to actually study and learn how the world works, and you could help figure out some of these really hard problems. There's obviously zero comparison between apprehending a mugger and addressing the historical and ongoing reality of a policy of land thefts that went on through the 80s in the apartheid government, where people's material resources and ability to make a livelihood were systemically discriminated against and stolen. And what the South African government is proposing, and what even the initial Rainbow Constitution provides for, is the sensible, small scale, and in this case, extremely moderate redressing of land theft that has gone on and went on in apartheid South Africa for decades. First, a couple of reality checks here. Of course, actually, according to the best research and statistics we have available, attacks on white farms in South Africa are at a 20-year low. The expropriation process has not started because the bill has not passed. The new constitutional amendment has not even passed the South African parliament yet. It's in conversation. In 1998, Nelson Mandela said the following, and I'm going to quote now from The Independent. South Africa's President Nelson Mandela warned yesterday that only a fair redistribution of land and its former black owners would guarantee peace as the country emerged from apartheid minority rule. While speaking at an emotional ceremony in the sleepy town of the volatile KwaZulu-Natal province held to mark the handing back of more than 600,000 hectares of land to former black farmers. Mr. Mandela, who became president in 1994 in the country's first democratic election, said that land reform that his government had enacted in the first year would help right the wrongs of the past. Our land reforms programs help address the injustice of apartheid. It fosters national reconciliation and stability. It also underpins economic growth and improves household welfare and food security. These are all undeniable truths. And the policy under Mandela was essentially that land would be sold back with government support to farmers that had been stolen from. And again, this is not historical ancient injustice. This is literally people that were alive still today who were kicked off of farms.
The immediately preceding generation.
It was, like now. Their land was stolen now. And yes, to do a stupid pedestrian analogy, if you stole some money from somebody 15 years ago, and that person and you were still alive, yes, you would have to pay restitution. By the way, and that's correct, there was a big project in terms of war crimes accountability for the stolen art, stolen money, stolen resources of Jews that were slaughtered in the Holocaust. There is a lot of historical basis for getting people their things back that were stolen by governments that oppressed and murdered them, such as in South Africa. This is a letter that was released that Lula wrote to the mine workers union on December 10th to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And the headline from it is, "I will not trade my dignity for freedom." And I'm just going to read a little bit from the piece. We have it up on screen from the site Brazil Wire, our friend Brian Mayer over there. He starts, I'll read it from this, but we can keep it up on screen. My friends, this is a very special day for humanity. 70 years ago, the UN ratified a declaration inspired by solidarity and respect for others and recognizing differences based on the right of freedom and the search for peace and understanding between men, women, and nations. Today is a day to celebrate for how far we've advanced and since then towards implementing these rights. It's a day to remember the heroes of the struggle on all fronts. Martin Luther King, who was sacrificed in defense of civil rights. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years incarcerated by the apartheid regime. Mahatma Gandhi, who even before the Declaration of Human Rights was transforming nonviolence into the strongest resistance against the colonial regime, and so many others who fought for a better world. Here in Brazil, we've had an opportunity to put many of the declarations into practice, such as the freedom of organizing and expression, the end of censorship, the recognition of rights of women and the GLBT people. We started the repatriation of centuries-long debt with Afro-Brazilians and indigenous peoples, and we firmly condemned torture. It's very sad for me to know that at this date we have to pay homage to two martyrs in the fight for rights, those of Comrade Jose Bernardo Orlando de Silva and Rodrigo Celestino from the MST, who were assassinated last weekend in the Dom Jose Maria Paris Agrarian Reform Camp in Paraíba. I ask everyone to pay homage to these heroes of the Brazilian people and to struggle for human rights. They were victims of the same violent hate speech that reached Marielle and Anderson, Master Co de Cantande, and young Caroline Albuquerque, among many others who were so prosecuted and threatened. 8 months ago, I'm skipping ahead. 8 months ago, I was there at the Metal Workers Union, surrounded by affection and solidarity of thousands of comrades who are not satisfied with my arbitrary and unjust imprisonment. I want to say that I am still with you and thinking about the future of our people every day. Brazil and the world know that the Lava Jato persecutors, Sergio Moro and the 4th Regional Court, set up a judicial farce to prevent me from being elected president again in accordance with the wishes of a majority of voters. I was condemned for quote-unquote undeterminate acts, that is for nothing. They did not present any proof against me and threw out all evidence of my innocence. Today I'm sure that I sleep lighter with a calmer conscience than those who condemned me. I do not want any favors. I just want justice. I will not trade my dignity for freedom. And I am deeply grateful for the solidarity I receive every day from the people of Brazil and of other countries. I thank the comrades from the Lula Livre Vigil, those who send letters for me in Curitiba, those who hold protests, write petitions, and act on social networks demanding a fair trial to which I have a right. I am aware that even in the difficult conditions we experience, not only in Brazil, but many countries, that the fight for the realization of human rights will continue. We will build a world of peace and fraternity where everyone without exception has a right to a dignified life. Until we meet again, a hug from your companion, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. Please stay on this. Every single Democrat should be speaking on the Lula case, as well as the broader crisis in Brazil and the region.
I'm also an author of a book published in the U.S.
Tell me the name of the book again, please, because we'll...
Well, the book is called, it's precisely about one of your questions, so that's why I mentioned it. It's
Please.
Act Globally, Memoirs of Brazil's Assertive Foreign Policy, and it is published by Roman and Middleton.
This is actually really, really important part of the speech. And, you know, there's a huge amount of substance in it, and it is incredibly important. I'd recommend everybody read Harvey J.K. It is important, particularly as just a matter of practical politics, to embrace that FDR legacy in the context of a Democratic primary. And in fact, very disappointingly, even Elizabeth Warren in this Atlantic piece laughed at the idea of democratic socialism, which...
She also stood up to clap Trump when he said we'll always be a capitalist country or whatever he said.
Yes, so. Which is a disaster. And it's a disastrous way of conceiving the world, and it's a disastrous way of... It's a limitation on your sense of democratic possibility and serious accountability, which will undermine even good technocratic reforms. And so, you know, as far as that part of the speech goes, the question for all the other Democrats is, do you support completing the New Deal or not?
I mean, this might actually be, this is an interesting conversation now for a few minutes. So like, I don't have, I think part of what's going on with the Warren dynamic is definitely there is some proxy warfare going on of like, oh, well, a lot of ultra annoying, disingenuous people are supporting her, and that's bleeding into, there's no doubt about that. And that does matter to some extent because your coalition and who you're building.
It's like, what are you giving off that is attracting these people?
Right.
It raises legitimate.
It raises legit. Exactly. And then the other part to me, and I think, you know, this is like what, like, I don't know if you read Matt Karp's new piece in Jacobin, which I just think was...
Read most of it,
yeah. I mean, I think he killed it. I think that, to me, that's kind of like probably my best, like, right, this is, someone wrote what I think, and I've been trying to articulate this kind of piece. And I wonder, like... When I think about my politics, I was somebody who, you know, basically started doing this sort of thing to some extent, basically 4 or 5 years ago. I did all sorts of stuff in my 20s, kind of started subbing for Sam and then kind of grew out. And yeah, like I would say there was one element of, okay, there's things like Occupy, then there was Black Lives Matter, and then certainly Sanders 2016. But a major part of my political formation was really going back to being, you know, going to World Bank protests in high school, was like, there is a politics that I actually have, and then I don't want to be completely disconnected from reality. So what is sort of available in the relative space? And, you know, in a political system that is so extremely to the right of where I am, right? And I think that Elizabeth Warren kind of emerges in this time where it's like, you're so under siege that it's like, okay, well, here's like this really effective committed advocate on a certain set of issues. And she probably doesn't even have, all of a sudden these debates are shockingly relevant. Like, do you think of yourself as Eugene Debs or Justice Brandeis? Right. 3 or 4 years ago, I'm like, shut the fuck up, right? Like, just vote for whoever is going to not put a Goldman person in charge of, regulating them, right? But now all of a sudden it's like, no, that actually is a distinction in perspective. And so to me, I think part of I'll wrap it up in a second because I know I'm kind of rambling, but I will say,
I think this is important stuff.
I think it gets to a lot because one is there is just this actually really serious differences here, and this is where other people get triggered at me because I would say these are more fun and interesting differences than a democratic socialist versus third way trash.
Right.
This is actually I would actually say a much less bureaucratic, much more clear power and labor-oriented view of politics versus a progressive technocratic one. I think that Teddy Roosevelt versus FDR. I mean, these are all like imperfect analogies. And I'm clearly on one side of that. And that's where I want things to go. And I think that debate matters. And I think in a healthier politics, it could actually be a really fruitful debate. People could have it without either on one hand obscuring how big the differences are, which is what the Warren people do, or on the other hand, I agree some people on my side go to she's Hillary Clinton or whatever, which I also disagree with. That's also coupled with the fact and my frustration, which is in the last 3 years, maybe there was a time when Elizabeth Warren first came on the scene and Bernie Sanders was a cool guy from Vermont who had an interesting brand, but was just kind of basically functionally a liberal senator, but not in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole reality has changed. And now that he's putting foreign policy stuff on the table, which I can't separate.
They were building a good operation by the end of January of 2016. But by that point, they'd already voted in Iowa, and Claire Sandberg, who's now his director of national organizing, put it best. She said, by the time the plane was ready to take off, we'd run out of runway.
Right.
And so they had the last several years to build this operation.
Did you write about very well in your book?
Yeah, and so now but that operation needs a candidate and needs a message and needs energy around it, and now it has that. So the pieces are in place for it to come together.
Let's go to the bad, which is we're going to be talking about the New York Times and this stunning dishonesty in this Cenk Uygur piece. And we'll start backwards. Let's actually start with the tweet of their disingenuous and disgusting pseudo-apology to him, which was a hard fought for. I mean, this is after days of people relentlessly critiquing them and we'll get to this in a second. An earlier version of this article referred imprecisely to a remark by Cenk Uygur, a radio host, who's running for California congressional seat. When David Duke, the white supremacist, appeared on the show and denied being racist, Mr. Uygur replied sarcastically when he said, "No, of course not." Now, the original piece literally just said, after David Duke said that, Cenk said, "No, of course not," without any context. I mean, that is... There's two explanations for this. One is that secretly and stealthily, the editorial staff and reporters like Jennifer Medina for the New York Times are actually the dumbest people on earth. They are unfit to report for a high school newspaper, and even saying unfit to report for a high school newspaper is an insult to high school newspapers. They don't understand the English language. They don't understand irony. They don't understand humor. They don't understand anything. I wouldn't even say context because I doubt they would understand the word. And New York Times is actually some type of secret feeding factory for people who are unable to perform basic thought functions or research. However, they were able to dig up clips for other parts of the article of out of context, dumb banter. But they could not find a more recent clip of a full interview where Cenk dunked on and embarrassed David Duke. They weren't able to find that. I have no doubt in my mind, as Anna Kasparian, and please watch Anna on the Young Turks. She did such an amazing job on this, that the New York Times distortion was intentional and malicious. That's certainly my opinion. I cannot not believe that it was intentional and malicious, because if I don't think it's intentional and malicious, then I have to think that on top of everything else we are dealing with, then the New York Times is staffed by the dumbest people in the history of the planet. And I'm actually not ready to take that one on right now. This is Cenk and David Duke. Let's play this yet again. And I'm going to discuss the broader implications of this. I was on the Hill the other day with Crystal Ball and Sagar talking about how this fits into a larger picture. But first, a reminder for everybody what the Times did to Cenk.
Name me one anti-Semitic person.
I say that
you can't.
The Jewish organized.
David, how can you think you're not anti-Semitic? How could you possibly think that you think the Jews control the world? That's anti-Semitism 101.
Give another quotation.
Kagan is on the Supreme Court, but so is Sotomayor, and she's definitely not Jewish. She's Latina. I mean, Kagan made it onto the Supreme Court, but so is Sotomayor. Those are two picks by Obama. Sotomayor, clearly not Jewish. In fact, what is it? What I think 7 out of the 9 justices are Catholic. Oh my God, the Catholics have taken over the Supreme Court. Watch out, David. Watch out. It's the Catholics that are the problem. But then you've got the Koch brothers who buy all these politicians. They're not Jewish. How does that fit into your conspiracy theory?
So,
I mean, you keep saying Goldman Sachs, but before Blankfein, the head of Goldman Sachs was Hank Paulson. Christian extraordinaire. The biggest political contributor in the country is not Sheldon Adelson. It is David and Charles Koch. They are enormously Christian. They're Christian. If you built everything, but somehow you don't have power anymore, and you can't even get into the schools you built, why are you guys such losers?
And then at the end, when in another part of the video, basically, Cenk is trying to end the interview. David Duke will not get off of the phone because he's desperate for attention. And Cenk is saying, and then at one point, David Duke says, I am not what you would call an anti-Semitic or a racist, something like that.
I'm not what you'd call a racist.
I'm not what you call a racist. And Cenk said, no, of course not. So...
And it should be said. I mean, not that. I mean, it shouldn't need to be said. But he said that that was his third in a string of sarcastic comments.
Right.
So in order to believe it was genuine, you'd have to think, oh, he was being sarcastic about him for the surrounding 30 seconds, and then all of a sudden decide to say, oh yeah, you're not a racist though, David Dukes. I mean, it's silly.
I mean, or to just watch. I mean, or to watch 30 seconds dug up by some Twitter troll account who I would suspect is actually part of a Democratic operation.
Or I mean, Sally Albright seems to have some answers. Maybe she could explain why she liked. Should we put that up right now?
Let's get to that later.
Okay.
I want to actually make 2 points about this though, because I want to actually look. Well, here's actually the point for the left. There are incredibly sleazy and dishonest people. And disinformation work is central to our politics. Don't do their job for them. Don't do COINTEL tactics for them, right? Like when it goes to the broader arc of Cenk's career or anybody's career, or anybody's life, number one, there's no such thing as human perfection. Okay, this is an idea I would think anybody who's an adult would have already let go of. Secondly, people evolve and change. Thirdly, no one is perfect. And fourth, there's going to be an enormous amount of dishonesty and disinformation, and you need to. This is the other side of the spiritual stuff we were talking about earlier. There needs to be some Machiavellian stuff. You need to stay tight with your people. You need to be savvy and ruthless. Sometimes you need to apply different metrics depending on who is in or out of your circle. And the bottom line is that Cenk is running a progressive race. He chose to run. He is running. He's running on really important issues. He'll be a good vote in the Congress, and people are trying to destroy him. So keep your eye on the big picture. Now, more broadly, I believe that we do need institutions like the New York Times, even in the most radical society. You do need journalistic outlets that have credibility and have something like objectivity. I don't like that word, but you do need non-opinion driven analytic and investigative journalism. You actually need that. When it comes to the opinion side, the entertainment side, we win. Well, I literally have no idea why you would not be a member of this show or the Majority Report or whatever. Or, I hate listing because you always leave somebody out. The Young Turks, whatever. Many, many shows that provide entertainment, political analysis, in some cases actually some of their own very good journalism. Ken Klippenstein is leaving all of these people in the dust as an example, and Emma Vigeland. But you do need institutions that can do mass investigative reporting, that can cover elections, that can do stories that, are frankly not what different institutions are equipped to do or even what they're designed to do. At precisely a time when there is an authoritarian upsurge in global politics and the credibility of institutions led by journalism. I mean, journalists have always been some of the most hated people in the United States, okay? They're held in extremely low regard. And you do have a president that threatens journalists' lives. You do have a global crackdown on press freedom across every corner of the globe. And the New York Times makes a big sanctimonious show about defending those values. When they do something this malicious and dishonest and disgusting, they are taking a bazooka to their own credibility. Because I know I can't trust. I mean, I can't. I mean, my God. What if they're writing a story about an election in Guyana and they have it in for one of the candidates and I don't have enough to contextualize it? They're doing this to somebody who's actually a pretty well-known public figure in the United States. And by the way, this is a second order. I mean, we already know the problems with institutions like the New York Times from a Chomskyan perspective in terms of ideological bias and how it relates to U.S. capital interests and so on. Absolutely. But this is even worse. I mean, this is just a rank, pathetic inability to do what even your stated metrics are. And that endangers all of us because we actually do need some of those functions served. So I would honestly look, if I was a New York Times subscriber, I would cancel immediately. Immediately. And I would go and I would look at whether, I mean, obviously I have a bias. Of course, I think you should support independent shows like this. But I'd also look at how you could support, I don't know, a ProPublica or something. Because they, and by the way, unlike almost every other sector of journalism, they are killing it. They are exploiting a huge amount of fear and neurosis about the moment while continuing to steadily undermine their credibility while the right attacks them. Because at the end of the day, they still have a horrifying ideological axe to grind against progressive forces. And it's disgusting and it's dishonest and it's demeaning, obviously to Cenk. But also, again, look, obviously I have a bias here. Anna's a very close friend of mine. And that whole thing, in my view, is co-built. I mean, she is elemental to every aspect of that. And the smearing and the lies about how that worked undermine what she's done in every way to make that product infinitely better, as well as address and improve all aspects of that editorial. So the New York Times is killing itself. And you need to be much more Machiavellian, strategic, and tight-lipped and synchronized in a disinformation age with dishonest actors across the board.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gregory LaPerche. I review books on YouTube. And yeah, I made this video just because Michael was a huge part of my political awakening, I guess, political journey, and even my YouTube journey. In terms of like the way he conducted himself and certainly the way he reached out to other people on the online left. That's in a lot of ways the way I've conducted myself on BookTube, I think. And he gave me like a good model to, run my channel off of, I guess, for lack of a better term. And yeah, I mean, I didn't know Michael, but I miss Michael. I miss like his transitions from like joking to like, talking about very serious issues, back to joking, back to very serious. And, it's weird, like, pulling out Michael Brooks' book recommendations just because, you know, these clips, like, where do I clip them? He's just like the entire, like, 5-minute monologue is related to the book and how it's important and stuff. And yeah, in a weird way, he was like a great booktuber for, you know, saying new, fresh, interesting things. For those of you who don't know what booktube is, well, I know what it is pretty well, where people talk about books on YouTube and, you know, like, the content gets stale. But when Michael talks about these books, it's not stale. No one talks about a book the way Michael talks about a book. And, you know, he definitely inspires me to pick up different books throughout the years. And his crew on the show and his sister has made a reading list inspired by Michael. So I can link that as well. But I thought it would be, you know, maybe good, maybe helpful, maybe interesting for people to have this longer list. So here it is on the internet, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Also, I'm wearing Puma, which might be a little bit blasphemous to wear when doing a video on Michael, but yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's okay. It'll be okay. Oh, also, Michael wrote a book, so it's very short, but very insightful. I've got to reread this last chapter just because it's kind of like his legacy in a lot of ways, like his vision for where we're going as a hopefully community, like online left community. And, well, I mean, hopefully taking it more into the mainstream. I think that was always his goal. So, yeah, here's to Michael Brooks. I can't believe it has been a year since he has passed. And, yeah, how do I even end this? Lula Livre, Allahu Akbar. And, oh, and also I think Michael would be pretty happy at the Brazilian presidential poll numbers right now. So there's that at least.